Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and a warm welcome to you all. I would like to begin the evening by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional owners of the land on which tonight's event takes place. I pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I'm Helen Hood, Director of the Center for Asian Business and Economics at the University of Melbourne. I would like to thank Asia Society Australia and RMIT Asia Trade and Innovation Hub for co-hosting this event. Over the past several decades, Asia has undergone a remarkable transformation, emerging as one of the most rapidly growing and economically vibrant regions in the world. It has become a key driver of global growth and innovation. With these opportunities come significant challenges. Understanding how to navigate these challenges is crucial for leaders and organizations operating in Asia, because the decisions made here will have far-reaching implications for the region as well as the whole world. So with these dynamics, tonight's event on leadership in Asia by Dr. Kyung-wha, the President and CEO of Asia Society, is both important and timely. We are at a pivotal moment where informed leadership can shape the future of Asia and the world. CABE is very honored to host this event. Without further ado, I would now like to invite the Honorable Dr. Craig Emerson, Director of the Australian APEC Study Centre, to introduce tonight's distinguished speakers. Over to you, Craig.
Well, thank you, and I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet this evening and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And thank you for your introduction. It's really fabulous to be here and a privilege to be representing the RMIT Asia Trade and Innovation Hub. It's a proud partner for tonight's Fireside Chat with Asia Society President and CEO Dr. Kyung on leadership in Asia. RMIT's Knowledge with Action strategy demonstrates a commitment to driving impact in the Asia-Pacific region. Our RMIT Trade and Innovation Hub is a gateway to the region. It's linked to our regional network, including the APEC Study Centre, of which, as you mentioned, I'm the director at RMIT. Also RMIT in Vietnam and other partners who are here tonight from the Asia Society. The RMIT Asia Trade and Innovation Hub was created with Asia Society Australia and co-locates the Asia Society Australia and the Australia-Vietnam Policy Institute at RMIT's Melbourne City campus. It brings together expertise to act as a front door for understanding and engaging with our region. As Australia sharpens its focus on Southeast Asia in particular, it's important that we're equipped with the understanding to navigate the challenges and the opportunities of our region. And I'm delighted that one of our esteemed global partners is here today, this evening, to share her insights and invaluable perspectives on leadership in Asia. Kyung-wha. Dr. Kang is President and Chief Executive Officer of the Asia Society, based in Asia Society's global headquarters in New York, and we confirmed a little earlier that she succeeded Kevin Rudd, who was kicked upstairs to be Australia's ambassador to the United States. Dr. Kang understands the nature of international diplomacy, having previously served as Minister for Foreign Affairs of South Korea, the Republic of Korea, the first woman to hold that title in the country's history. Dr. Kang is an achieved and acclaimed diplomat in the Korean Foreign Ministry and the United Nations, having held positions in Seoul, New York and Geneva. Prior to her appointment as Minister for Foreign Affairs, she served as Senior Advisor on Policy to the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, as well as Chief of his transition team. But that's not all. Dr Kang also served as Assistant Secretary-General from Humanitarian Affairs from 2013 to 2016 under Ban Ki-moon, and was Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights from January 2007 to March 2013 under Kofi Annan. So would you please join with me in welcoming Dr Kyung-wha.
Thank you. No, thank you very much, Craig. Thanks for the generous introduction for our main act today. You know, it's always a daunting prospect. I'm the local CEO of Asia Society. I'm interviewing my global CEO, so I thought I need to put a bit of work into the questions. I hadn't realised, though, you know, when we arrived here, the number of people that came up to Dr. Kang and gave her a gift or wanted a selfie. I thought I was about to interview our global CEO and a distinguished former diplomat and UN official. I hadn't realised that who I'm really interviewing is Beyonce.
I don't have the musical talent, though.
So I'll stick with the questions I had, it's such a pleasure for us at Asia Society to host our global CEO. I'm a little worried I'm going to kill her this week. She's been in Melbourne yesterday. We had our big Asia summit with AFR today, where she spoke. It was a great pleasure to join with the Centre for Asian Business Economics and our colleagues at RMIT to host the event tonight, to make sure that we got Dr. Kang out to as many people as we could. And then we're heading to Canberra tomorrow to do a lecture, and then finally to Sydney. We're talking about leadership in Asia. Before we talk about the leadership, the thing we need to talk about first is Asia. What's the landscape on which leadership in Asia needs to operate today? What are the defining features of it?
Well, Anthony, thank you. Wonderful to be here to see your team, Asia Society Australia, doing such excellent work. And I think the collaboration with the Financial Review showcased itself in the very robust discussions all day at the Asia Summit 2024. I'm embarrassed to admit that this is my first visit to Melbourne. I came into very choppy weather, but it's cleared up. But regardless of the capriciousness of the weather, I can clearly see why people choose this city year after year as one of the most favorite places to live and work in. There's a feeling of positivity, energy, but a sense of maturity about that energy in the city. And I think that's probably permeates the university campuses and the academia as well. So truly honored to be here on campus and having this opportunity to speak to you. I'm a lifelong public servant, both in my country and the UN, and so my life has been dedicated to promoting global causes, the public good for humanity, peace, co-prosperity, human dignity, and I think lately the health of our one planet that we all share. And now, as President CEO of Asia Society, succeeding a very proud and eminent Austrian leader, Kevin Rudd, is truly an honor and an excitement for me. Kevin has hugely enhanced the profile and the capacity of Asia Society, both in New York and globally. And so he left behind a very big pair of shoes for me to fill, but I certainly hope to be able to fill it and take the organization to even greater heights in the coming years. But I also have to admit to having mixed feelings about the current state of world affairs. Right? I am excited, on the one hand, that this is a period of Asia's rise, and of course, to be leading an as an Asian, leading an organization that has been at the forefront of engagement with Asia is truly, truly exciting. But on the other hand, we see that global dynamics are increasingly more about conflict, discord, and crisis, and that's deepening around the world. So it's exciting, it's challenging, but it's also concerning times that we live in. And I think, the global press is preoccupied with the big wars now in Ukraine and Gaza unfolding and the many repercussions of that. But I think there's also a clear sense that the future of the world, the global order, will be largely defined by how the US, China, long-term strategic competition unfolds. And that was pretty much a big part of the discussion at the Asia Summit today. But I very much appreciated Minister Wang's very, very thoughtful and comprehensive policy statement about how Australia is positioning itself in this competition. And that is, to quote her exact words, I think, is that we're not a superpower, but we are a power, nonetheless, with agency. And power, able, I would call it, middle powers in Asia, needs to speak out, needs to play a part in mitigating the competition, the rivalry between the two big powers towards greater stability, to greater understanding, and perhaps even more compromise on both sides of this rivalry. And I think as South Korea's foreign minister, I very much share that approach to the competition. That is, we cannot deny that is the context that defines the global order these days. On the other hand, I think, and this is further elaboration on Minister Wang's point, we have agency. Asian countries are increasingly confident. The emerging, developing economies of Asia. We heard from India today at the panel how, India is 7% economic growth. It's a big part of Asia's rise, and India is very, very confident, whether you're talking about India as a country, but also the Indian diaspora. As Asia Society president, I get to meet a lot of leaders from different walks of life, and I have to say, Indian leaders in all walks of life are extremely impressive. We have the World Bank president, Ajay Banga, who we had over at Asia Society for a speaking engagement. And he's one of the most visible, but in every spheres of life. The Asian diaspora in general is very confident in the United States, and I think it is probably the case here as well. So that growing sense of confidence is what we need to build upon, utilize to counterbalance this rivalry, if I would say. And I think that has to be that has to be the approach, and that has to be how we view Asia in the larger context, not just China and Australia, China, Korea, but look at Asia as a whole. You see India, you see Southeast Asia, ASEAN, you see Northeast Asia, and so there's a lot to do in this neighborhood that is not just U.S.-China. And I'm a little surprised to see Australia not pulling its weight, if I could put it that way, especially in the Southeast Asian part of this region, which is central. If you look at geographic, that is the center of Asia. And I think greater engagement with that part of Asia from Northeast Asia, from Australia, and certainly China is very much already part of that game, is, I think, to the benefit of all as we work towards a more constructive multipolarity, which is clearly the way that things are moving towards.
It is a really interesting moment in Asia's history. Asia is at the centre of the world. You could say in negative ways, in the sense of, potentially a site of future conflict in the region, but it's also the centre of the world in highly positive ways as well, in terms of the way that Asia and Asian countries drive economic growth, technological change, adoption of AI, all those kinds of things. So it's that mix of opportunity, but also the risks as well. What kind of skills does that require of leaders from the region? What does the current era require most in terms of the skills and experience of the people leading the countries of the region?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's so much going on and so much reporting about what's going on, and not all of it is fact-based. We live in a ubiquitous media environment, and I think one of the skills that leaders have to have is to be able to filter, through all the noise, if I may call it, and really get to the facts and base your policy decision based on facts. You see the reporting about China, much of it is not based on facts, as far as I can tell. But of course, you have to ascertain your facts constantly, and that is the difficulty of leadership in this day. But if facts, truth is a little bit more subjective, because that's interpretation on facts, right? So you can look at half a cup that's filled. Somebody will say, "Oh, that's half full." Others will say, "That's half empty," depending upon your perspective. So even a simple fact like that leads to, there's a subjective element when you're interpreting the facts. So it's tough. Huh? How do you really weave through all of that to make sure that you base your judgments on facts? But I think that's an indispensable skill if you are a leader determined and committed to leading your country towards greater peace and prosperity.
It's actually a great segue into my next question. You've kind of read my mind. One of the words I don't like to use in relation to Asia is the word complex. People say it all the time. They say, we're living now in this very complex era. The world is a more complex place. I think that's a very ahistorical view of the world. Mm-hmm. I think you pick any moment in history.
Yes.
If you're an Indigenous Australian standing on the shores of Botany Bay watching, the British fleet sail in, the world got suddenly very complex. If you were an American atomic scientist watching the first atomic bomb tested, the world suddenly got very complex. I don't think it's about complexity, but it is about something you just mentioned, which is information. Yeah. The amount of information that leaders that is available, mm-hmm. that they then therefore have to absorb, mm-hmm. and they have to make decisions at pace, mm-hmm. has definitely increased exponentially. Right. So it goes to a lot more facts, and how do you ascertain those facts, mm-hmm. particularly when there are a lot of non-facts flying around. Right. What does that mean for a leader? I mean, you must have faced that when you were foreign minister, where there's a lot more information on your fingertips. How do you process it? How does a good leader wade through all that information?
First of all, I think you need to build a good team around you. And I always say leadership is team building, to make sure that you have good people, you enable the good people to do their very best, and then you trust them, right? So you can't deal with the information overflow on your own. You're as an individual, you're limited. But as an individual, I think you need to have a great deal of, your level of tolerance for uncertainty and messiness has to be at a high level. If you're constantly seeking clarity, you're not going to get that. You're going to be, so that ability to deal with the uncertainties and the messiness, I think, is absolutely essential. But to work through that uncertainty with the team around you, And so I always at least tried to be a leader who builds team and does things with my team instead of this being, I'm the leader and you follow me. I've always wanted to be a leader who say, work with me.
You've been very deeply involved in efforts to empower and advance female leadership. When it comes to leadership, do women do it better? And do women do it better in Asia?
I don't like stereotypes, and so I don't like to compare women's leadership and men. I mean, there are good men leaders, there are bad men leaders, there are good women leaders, there are bad women leaders. But team building is what I see as good leadership. And I do feel women, because a greater ability to listen and greater empathy, maybe, is more conducive to that team building than perhaps our male counterparts. But I always stand to be corrected. I always want to be corrected because I certainly want men to be also team building leaders.
That's a great illustration of the difference, because I never want to be corrected. So. When we talk about female leadership in Asia, I mean, obviously lots of differences in different parts of Asia in terms of the progress of female empowerment. Where do you think Asia is at the moment in terms of female empowerment?
A long way to go. I think Australia and New Zealand is the exception in the Asian continent. Korea is at the very bottom. Japan only next to the bottom when it comes to the OECD Gender Seating Index. And things are not improving. In fact, I think we're falling back many steps in many countries. So and that requires not just the efforts of women leaders like myself, but also, men leaders with the political will to work with women. And I think we're missing that in many of the Asian countries.
I mean, what needs to happen, do you think? What are the things you'd like to see happen in your own country, for example?
Well, I'm in the line of foreign minister. I'm the first and the 38th, so 37 old men. I'm waiting for the second woman to come, and that's the burden of being the first. You want the second, third, fourth coming, and so that it doesn't become news anymore, right? But to the extent that it is still news is an indication that we have a long way to go.
Yeah. Let's talk about a potential, another potential first, this time in the US. If Kamala Harris does win the US election, what impact do you think this will have on global affairs?
This is a careful water to tread, because we don't want to say anything about the outcome of an election of a very important country, but a very consequential election.
So we're talking hypotheticals now, right? Okay, so should she win?
But of course, it's hugely exciting to see a woman candidate. Just the candidacy of a woman, and with Asian ethnic background, is hugely exhilarating, I must say. And I think we all feel that, women leaders all around the world. So yes, I think the candidacy alone has been a huge boost already. And if she makes it, I think it will be a big change for gender dynamics around the world.
And how do you think that will resonate in Asia? You mentioned her Asian identity as being important. What does that mean for not just for women leaders in Asia, but also, do you think, for her approach, to China, to US China competition? Do you think that will change?
I don't think the policy itself will change. I think probably the continuation of the Biden administration foreign policy framework generally. But the individual style of leadership could change, I think. I think she's, I think she has more of a persuasive style to her leadership, and I don't know too much. I'm just learning, but her entire career has been about persuasion. Prosecution is persuasion, right? You're building your case. And I think some of that persuasiveness, persuasion skills probably we'll see a lot of that on the global stage.
How do you think President Xi, how will he look at a situation for the first time? He's dealing with a female US president. Does that change his approach?
Well, I think they must be scratching their heads at this point for that eventuality. I don't know enough about what's going on to hypothesize about that. But certainly, I think it's a big. I won't say a challenge or a problem, but a puzzle, I think, because she's not a very known quantity on the foreign policy front.
Yeah. I want to take you back to your career as South Korea's first female foreign minister. When you look back at your career, what do you count as your big achievements, and do you have any regrets?
Mm-hmm. I think it's the achievements and the regrets are the same thing, because we really pushed to engage North Korea to get it to commit to denuclearization and to make some steps toward peaceful coexistence with South Korea. But we also had to do this with the United States closely, leading the denuclearization trend, and South Korea leading the peaceful coexistence track. And when the denuclearization track collapsed in Hanoi in 2019, everything stopped. And so what a missed opportunity. If that engagement had continued, I don't think we would see North Korea-Russia military collaboration. That is now a huge security issue, not just on the war front in Ukraine, but also on the Northeast Asia security dynamics. So you could look at past missed opportunities. So the success side of it was in this period of a very active engagement. I can't tell you how many messages I got from my colleagues in the UN, just thanking us for this message of peace. The world is hungry for peace. The world is dying for some good news about peace. And when you saw that happening on the DMZ, the last remaining legacy of the Cold War, I think that excited the world, right? And that has been dashed. So yes, success was also that big failure. But I think the other success as foreign minister was our ability to deal with the COVID-19 crisis domestically, but also to tell our story overseas and to share our very successful methods in dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic across the whole world. I can't tell you how many phone calls, Zooms, seminars that we had in the middle of that crisis to share the way we were responding to this. We were just simply prepared, and we had struggled with the MERS epidemic a few years before that, and that was a disaster. So after that, laws were put in place, disease control measures were in place. So when COVID hit us, we were just prepared, and therefore we were quite successful. And to tell that story and to take care of our Korean nationals overseas while we were doing this domestically, we brought back lots of, I think to the tune of about 50,000 Koreans living overseas who wanted to come back home in the middle of this pandemic. We were able to bring that all home.
I also want to talk about your time at the UN. You held a number of leadership roles as Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, as Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, as an advisor to the UN Secretary General. What do you count as your major achievements in your time at the UN? When
you look back, in the past, what looked like success at that time lose their shine with the flow of time. But my time at Human Rights, I was very instrumental in establishing the UPR. I don't know if people who do human rights are very familiar with this process called the Universal Periodic Review, which is taking place at the Human Rights Council, where every member states of the United Nations, gets reviewed for their human rights record every 4.5 years. And that was the new mechanisms that were set up by the Human Rights Council. And our office was, Office for the High Commissioner of Human Rights was tasked to design the process and provide the reports that go into that process. And as Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, I think I played quite an important role in that regard. Looking at the UPR now, it's lost its luster. It's become a more just a process, and I wonder how much that counts for leading to real progress on the ground for everyday people on the human rights front. Humanitarian affairs, I think it's more of a sad, painful story than a success story, because at that time in 2013, 14, 15, this was, humanitarian case flows were exploding because mostly the war in Syria. And so the human rights community said, this cannot go on. We need to find a way to appeal to the world to please, political actors, get your act together, stop the wars, stop these conflicts. Natural disasters, national authorities, please get your act together and be prepared, because, natural disaster, when it strikes, the damage is not just about the disaster, it's about how prepared you are, right? So, so on all fronts, I always say humanitarian crises are the result of failures. Political failures, governance failures, and this was happening too much. So we wanted to alert the world. And the appeals that we were making for these human crises were the response level was dropping. Governments were stretched, donor countries were stretched. So we wanted to put a stop to that, and that was we asked the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to host a World Humanitarian Summit to get that message across the world, and hoping that this would somehow, shake sense into the political actors. It didn't, and we know the story of increasing humanitarian caseloads even more after that. So, I'm, my heart aches to see all the crises that are happening. And the response rate, the UN humanitarian response system is really, really stretched. And that is, and sometimes it is only that makes the difference between life and death for a lot of the people in these disaster areas.
You mentioned the word luster when you talk about the UN. I mean, the UN gets bashed a lot these days. Has it lost its luster? What does it need to do to kind of revitalize itself, to raise its standing again in the world? Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously a lot of that criticism is unfair. Nevertheless, there's also criticism that does seem to reflect where the organisation is at the moment. Mm-hmm. And what do you think the UN needs to do to kind of regain that position of centrality in global affairs that it seems to have lost a little bit?
Well, a lot, I think. So those of us who've served the system, I was there for over 10 years. I still have friends who are serving the system, and it gets a lot of unfair bashing because a lot of the dysfunctionality is due to member state dynamics, primarily at the Security Council level, the P5s, the big power plays in the Security Council that has just hamstrung the most important global organization, the Security Council, the only power that has that the decision that binds the global community, and you have 5 sitting members with vetoes. So if one of the 5 veto-wielding powers says no, the rest of the world may agree, but it doesn't move, right? And that is a fundamental democratic deficit at the heart of the UN system, as I always say. And it's been there from day one. But now the dysfunctionality is increasingly more visible, and the consequences more widespread. But you don't underestimate the other work that the specialized agencies work that the UN does. For example, the WHO, a lot of these specialized agencies, you have hardworking international civil servants dedicated to the cause, dedicated to their mission, and continuing to do the work under these very difficult political circumstances. So I think, you know, they need to be given credit. They need to be encouraged. But unless you get the member states dynamics sort of through, you're not going to see fundamental change. But on the other hand, you know, so therefore, do we, you know, move and, you know, create another multilateral agency? First of all, it's going to be nearly impossible to do that. And I say, stick with what you have, make it better, rather than you don't have another arena to move to.
We're going to take some questions from the floor now. Please raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question, and wait for the microphone, and tell us who you are, and if you can, keep your questions brief. So, it's always tough being the first, right? Just down here.
Hello, I'm Paul Jensen. I'm the Deputy Dean in the Faculty of Business and Economics. So my question was, very early on you mentioned that Australia is not really pulling its weight, particularly on the leadership front in ASEAN and Southeast Asia. And I'm very curious to hear what you had in mind when you made that remark, because I think it's a very, very telling remark. And I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on domains that we should be doing more, and perhaps some action items for us as a society to start driving our political leaders to do more in that space.
No, I was preparing for my lecture at the Foreign Ministry, and the theme is how Asia views Australia. So I've looked at different parts of Asia and look at some of the surveys, the perceptions in those countries about Australia. And you know, one of the most revealing ones was a recent survey of ASEAN elites, 2024 survey by the Yusof
ISAC Institute, the Institute of Southeast Asian
And then they
Studies.
do this every year. And it turns out Australia's standing among these ASEAN elites has been declining for the past couple of years. To me, that was a bit of a surprise, because you know, looking at from the Korean perspective as foreign minister, we always looked at Asia as a very important pillar of our foreign policy. We all, you know, very, you know, consistent, persistent efforts to build not just the political ties, but the economic ties, the people-to-people ties. So, and you know, I just assume that Australia, close to the ASEAN region, Indonesia, and that Australia would be doing the same thing. And so to see that effort, I assumed, not reflected in the ASEAN Elite Survey was surprise. I now coming here, listening to the discussions at the ASEAN Summit, listening to Penny Wong's speech this morning, it's understandable, because Australia is not investing enough in the ASEAN countries. In fact, Australia's investment in the ASEAN country has dropped over the past few years, a couple of years. So, you know, there's a lack of visible business presence in the ASEAN countries. You know, I looked at individual countries, the 10 countries, to see if there was a great differentiation among how, for example, Indonesia's elite view Australia, and you know, Myanmar and all. Big difference. A bit of surprise to see how Minister Wang was elaborating about this extraordinary history between Australia and Indonesia. And in the Indonesian elite's ranking of the strategic importance of Australia is, guess what? 7. Australia's most important country in Indonesia, and this is the perception, the latest perception of ASEAN, the most important ASEAN partner for Indonesia. Singapore, I think, came about 4th. Overall 7th. When you go to countries further away, it gets even lower. But I think is that Indonesia, the most important partner in ASEAN for Australia, is that I think is a big challenge for, it's a revealing challenge and something that Australian policymakers and business leaders need to think carefully, because business leaders may say, oh, the short-term thinking of business leaders, it's difficult, it doesn't lead to the bottom line being, but business leader, I think, also needs to think of the longer term, because if this continues, as Minister Wang said, 10 years later, this is a losing proposition for Australia, because in the end, as I always say, the first order of statecraft is to get along, build prosperity with your immediate neighbors. Right? And your immediate neighbor is Indonesia and ASEAN. Distance still matters in international relations. And yes, you may find this distance from the larger Asian continent a bit of a comfort, but I don't think, I certainly don't think that justifies the complacency or the ambivalence of Australia towards Southeast Asia if you are looking at the longer term.
Just here.
Hi, Dr. Kang. Welcome to Melbourne. The choppy weather's quite normal, but hope you come back. My name's Christopher Kong. I started an organization called Crouching Tiger Network. We help skilled professionals from Asia to build networks and build a career in Australia. Corporate Australia places great importance on individuals having local experience and local networks. A lot of the professionals from Asia may not necessarily have local networks or local experience. My question is, what do you think can be done to unleash, these professionals do have lots of knowledge, experiences, and networks in their home country that could be really valuable. So the question is, what do you think could be done to tap into this great potential that these talented people can bring to Australia? Thanks.
I think you get into the issue of the Asian diaspora, and each community, whether it's the Chinese diaspora, Indian diaspora, Malaysian diaspora, Korean diaspora, each different history of getting settled into that country. So there is a diversity there, but I think the diaspora community as a whole can better organize, better come together, and this is where an entity like Asia Society can be instrumental. We can be the convening core that brings these different professional skills from the different groups of the diaspora communities. We do that in New York, for example. I think we can do a lot more, and I hope that will also be the mission going forward for Asia Society, the Australia chapter here.
Yes.
Hi, Dr. Khan. Thank you for your speech. It was really engaging. I'm a student from the University of Melbourne studying in Master of Management. I would ask for what is one advice you would give to a student just like me that's about to graduate and to help with the global humanitarian work and world peace. So advice that you probably put in one sentence or one word. That
One sentence.
Oh, sorry, could be longer. It's
2 words.
just for the young generations that would want to do some good for the global society.
I think you should give me a couple of sentences. First of all, don't lose that sense of mission. I think it's wonderful. But also be patient. You have many years, many decades ahead of you. So don't be impatient. Don't think you have to do something tomorrow, next year, or. But also never lose your what I would call intellectual curiosity. Never be intellectual lazy. Don't fall into that trap of intellectual laziness is the advice I always give to my students back in Korea at Yonsei, and I would give the same advice to you.
Thank you so much.
Wait for the microphone.
Moan from Center Asian Business. Dr. Kang, thank you very much for coming. As you know, you talk a lot about ASEAN centrality this morning. And ASEAN is now going through a generational change in leadership. And how do we in Australia, how do our Australian politicians and our business people deal with this next generation, which does not have the same historical linkages to Australia than the previous generation? Thank you.
You know, I would be presumptuous to say that I know a lot about the Asian, ASEAN, Australian dynamics, other than this understanding there is a big gap, clearly, that needs to be filled. With that disclaimer, ASEAN, as you say, is leading to new leadership. And the ASEAN public, generally speaking, is increasingly confident, whether you're talking about Vietnam, Indonesia, the key Singapore, and that confidence leads to, I think, a more practical, pragmatic-minded desire to engage with the rest of the world. And to strengthen that centralness of ASEAN. I think ASEAN centrality is their mantra. And there was a time when I thought it was, it's just a rhetoric, right? But I think that rhetoric has to be turned into a substance, not just by the ASEAN countries themselves, but who view countries like Australia, South Korea, Japan, who see that as critical to peace and prosperity in all of the Asian region. Because geographically, it is central. And that central piece has to be prosperous, stable, and at peace. Of course, you have the Myanmar challenge sitting right in the middle of that, and that's a quandary for everybody. And then that, I think, requires the conflict dynamics are changing, and I think there's a little bit of an opening for some discussion to move it towards a resolution. But I'm speaking ahead of myself. But overall, ASEAN centrality is in the interest of all the countries of the region, and I would certainly want Australia doing its part to bring greater substance to that. And that I think the ASEAN public is ready to do that.
Dr. Kang, you've been a senior UN official. You were South Korea's first female foreign minister. All great preparation for your current role. You've reached the apex now, CEO of Asia Society. Can you talk a bit about your priorities as our new president and CEO?
Well, I certainly want to preserve the unique profile that Asia Society has, which is a bridge builder, a platform for what we call inclusive dialogue. We, as an institution, do not have a position on the sensitive political issues. Individual staff, individual experts in the office may have their views, and we don't censor them. But as an office, as an institution, we don't. And that gives us the credibility to host dialogues that can be controversial, contentious, and sometimes very critical. But that's we are. And then because we have consistently done that over the years, we are a trusted dialogue partner for key countries. And I certainly want to preserve that. I also want to rebuild the arts and culture pillar of Asia Society, which is the traditional core of Asia society when John D. Rockefeller III founded it, and wanting to educate ignorant Americans about Asia, a better understanding about Asia through arts and cultural exchanges. And that remains a unique skill, unique toolbox that Asia society has, and want to upgrade that, update that to the contemporary times, utilizing our very, very precious collection and expertise. I also think that Asia society has to reflect the full diversity of Asia. And it's wonderful that we have our center here to do Australia, Hong Kong, Japan, a restart in Korea, Philippines, India, and these local chapters are very, very important to us. But at the headquarters level, we need that matching capacity so that when you look at, for example, India from sitting in New York, and you look at India sitting in Mumbai, they're different, and you need to bring that together to get the full picture. And so I very much hope that we can have that capacity both at headquarters and at the local level, so that Asia society is an entity that reflects the full diversity. I mean, we can't do everything, but at least some strategic diversification of focus, as I call it, is what I hope to be leading the office towards and the global network towards.
So Dr. Kang, we're in a university, so it seems appropriate to end on a philosophical question. Are great leaders born or are they made?
Yeah, well, you know the answer, both. But I think more nurture than nature. I mean, there's clearly nature elements. If something is written into your DNA that makes you're unable to control your temper, or something is wired in your brain that makes team leadership difficult. Yeah, that's nature. But I always believe human beings are capable of constant learning, and the learning is nature. I think whether it's the habit of the heart or a habit of the mind, we have huge capacity to learn. Of course, as you age, that capacity dwindles. But with youthful minds, it's just almost an open plate how you shape that. And I think the leadership quality also, therefore, can be taught and learned.
What a great answer. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure to interview our global CEO. Please join me for a round of applause.
Thank you.
And of course, we owe a lot to Dr. Kang. And clearly, from an Australian perspective, we have to learn a lot more about teamwork. We have to learn more about leadership, how to work with Asia, not only from an academic perspective, which we do very well, but from the business world and from the political world. So thank you again, Dr. Kang. We appreciate you coming all the way from the United States. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.